I believe that a design is about making 2 + 2 = 5.
If you were advising a younger version of yourself starting out in today's market, what would you tell them?
But being able to create something that you know is likely to outlive you is a great honour, really.
So Kingsley, how have you gotten to where you are and where did this all start?
Yeah, I mean, I've wanted to be an architect ever since I was 8 years old. My father was a builder, my grandfather was also a builder, and my father used to bring the old die-line prints home at the weekend to plan his week ahead on the building site. And when I was little, I used to crawl all over those die-line prints and take a keen interest in what he was doing, what the drawings meant. So I pursued that. Even things like choosing GCSEs and A-levels, etc., was always pitching towards being an architect. When I was at university and in my later career, I took a very keen interest in urban design as well, which is where architecture meets planning. So it's like 3D design at a larger scale and landscape design as well. And so my career has also been very much steered in that direction as well.
So how did that lead you to where you are now? Like, how did you, because a lot of people, they could go work for a practice and they'll stay in that practice, or they might jump to a few different ones. You decided to go down the route of having your own business. What made you go pursue that?
Yeah, I mean, I have worked for big businesses, both as an employee and as a freelancer. Not to offend anybody or any businesses, I'm not really a big business person. I hate turf wars. I hate people saying, why was he appointed to associates and he wasn't, or I wasn't, etc. So I do prefer smaller businesses. I'm very much a big believer in teamwork and networking amongst the team. So when I was in England initially, I was working for a practice of, say, 20 strong, 10 of which were architects and 10 of which were surveyors. I then went and worked in Sydney for a year. After that, I then worked in Hong Kong for 10 years. So initially I was working for the government in Hong Kong, but then set up as a freelance consultant, advising the developers on building the skyscrapers and things like that. And also, wearing another hat, I was also advising the government about planning policy and helping them write planning policy. And also with a third hat, I was teaching at the university for 7 years as well. So that was fun. So all those things were running in parallel. So I was like a third of my time, say, was devoted to each of those things.
How have you implemented what you've learned from all of those roles into what you do now? And is there a difference between working for an architecture practice and running your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've learnt, I'm a great believer that you've got 2 of these and just 1 of these. So I'm a great believer in listening to people and learning from people. We all learn things every week and every day. So I guess from the big practices I worked with, some practices I worked alongside as a client representative. So for example, in Hong Kong, we were doing the skyscrapers. So I was working quite closely with people like SOM and KPF, they're big architects companies from the States, people like Terry Fowle from England, architects, and their pursuit of excellence, if you like. And also something that stayed with me from SOM, working with them, was they always said, what can we bring to this project? Okay, and that's a good philosophy, and that's what we always say at Designscape, what can we bring to this project? And even more so than that, what can we bring to this project that other people may not be able to have brought to that project? So it's a great attitude and a great philosophy of life, I think. And certainly it's what we bring into our work. And it's also, it feeds back to how we help our clients as well, because we love clients who love architecture. So we wouldn't work for people who are not interested in the quality of the product at all.
So when you're doing your designs, are you designing these properties based on what you've learned when you worked in Sydney and when you worked in Hong Kong? Does that tie into the designs that you do today?
Yeah, a little bit, because England, not to be rude, but England was a bit sleepy when I was in Hong Kong. So I used to come back, for holidays and Christmas and stuff. And then England sort of gradually started catching up with Hong Kong, where Hong Kong had been and where Sydney had been, which is quite exciting. And it's good to see that happen to England, It's been a bit more dodgy the last few years, because I often criticise England for having a really bad can't-do attitude. But I think we're now beginning to regain a can-do attitude, which is great. But certainly the pursuit of quality is very important.
So how many projects have you done now, roughly?
With Designscape, since I came back to England, we've done 650 projects over the last 20 years.
How have you found those projects?
Well, they've been great fun. Every project is different. That's one thing that we like about our practice. We're not doing like potato punch schemes where you just repeat 200 houses. Each site is a challenge, each site is rewarding, which in a way, obviously it's hard work, but it does make each project enjoyable.
So, of course, what you learned from your first project to now your most latest project, I'm sure along the way your philosophy towards these projects has evolved. How would you say it's evolved from your project 50 to your project now?
I guess there's more emphasis these days on sustainability, by which I mean genuine sustainability rather than greenwash, which basically is people talking nonsense and trying to whitewash their situation or blag their way through sustainability. We're great believers in genuine sustainability, in things like BNG and also doing energy modelling. We work with a company called Mesh who do energy modelling of our buildings. So you've got real tangible results and you know you're not speaking greenwash. And also the pursuit of excellence, I guess. And also added to that is the need for really good high quality 3D surveys. I mean, we're very much believers in technology. So in all our projects, which you probably couldn't have done, say 20 years ago necessarily, there's lots of good surveyors who can do point cloud 3D laser surveys. And once we've got that, we import that into our system, into our Revit BIM system, then it gives you total freedom. It's almost like gaming would have been in the past. But like 20 years ago, there weren't enough providers necessarily, even if that technology did exist. And the great thing about that as well, of course, because the technology means it's cheaper. So you can actually get that done as cheap or cheaper than you could do for an old-fashioned survey 20 years ago.
So, when you're looking for people to work with colleagues-wise or when you're hiring, what is it that you look for?
They've got to be committed to excellence. They've got to be a people person. I know it's quite a curt response, but you've got to get on with people.
Yeah.
In life, it's all about networking, getting on with people. You don't want any sort of anybody who's going to cause trouble, socially, if you like, in the company or with other people, rub people up the wrong way. They've got to be a nice people person. We also look for design skills, of course, because I can't design everything. We have a very proactive and creative process in the company where we batter ideas back and forth, either over a table or by share screen if they're remote. And that's how we sort of whittle down our designs and refine the designs. So once we've done back and forth, you might find and unlock something that even I or that other person didn't realise that could be in that scheme.
So people see you in meetings or on site, but not everyone sees how you think. How would you describe your approach to getting things done properly?
A lot of it arises from analysis, really. I mean, a lot of our schemes are context driven. So that means you do need a good survey, like one of these point cloud surveys. And you do need to have a full analysis of the situation. So we don't start off by designing, we start off by analysing, where are the views, where's the sun path, where's places that you can't overlook, like to neighbours' gardens, for example. So a lot of analysis. And also, at a similar level, is talking through the scheme with the client. So, for example, if we're working for a private client, because the smallest projects we do are big, £500,000 extensions, these days really big extensions. So the first question I ask the client is, how long have you been living here? And that's not just me being intrusive or nosy. I genuinely want to know, because I want to know they've been there long enough to know the good things about their house and the shortcomings about that house. So it's all about talking things through with the client, because really it's about, an architect alone can't achieve anything. You need a good site and a good client. And it's about drawing those things together.
Have you ever had a moment in either your career working for a practice, but more so I'm referring to you having your own business, where you thought maybe this isn't it?
No.
Never?
No. Any more questions? No, I've always been, joking aside, I love architecture and I love what I do.
What about...
So I've never had a mistake moment, like I've made a wrong career choice or need to get out of here. I don't even want to retire. I could retire if I wanted to. I've got the intention of retiring.
What about in terms of having your own business? Have you ever had, maybe I shouldn't have?
No, because it gives you the freedom. You're not being an narcissist or anything, but it's nice to have the freedom to steer things in your own direction rather than having a line manager or a partner in charge who tells you what to do or gives you direction. It's also nice to be able to, even negotiate your own fee agreements, knowing how much time you need to spend on a project. The relationship with that client, if you're the boss of the business, say, you get a much tighter relationship with that client because you're both talking from the heart and you can control everything rather than being, say, a middle manager or a lower employee. being told what to do. So, like I say, it's the freedom, really, the freedom to help shape the culture of the business, and also how you deal with your own clients. Because some architects are not, well, I wouldn't say unscrupulous, but they do work that make their staff work very, very hard. And there are many practices who do genuinely make their staff work hard in an evening for free. And really, that's not the culture that we want to inculcate.
I can verify this. So, if you've never questioned anything or doubted anything, have you felt like you've come across any hardships? And if you have, how have you found a way to overcome that?
Yeah, I guess experience helps. Obviously, I'm very, very old now. I'm in my 60s, got 35 years of experience, but also having a team around you. So if you've got good staff, rather than being a gulf between the leader, if you like, and the minions, you need good staff who are solid, got their own experience, got their own ideas, and also the wider team. So I always say, so on a building site, if something is going wrong on a building site, the client might have a panic attack. I think the sky's falling in. But if you've got a good, solid team of experienced people in every single discipline, one or two people are bound to pipe up and say, don't worry, we had exactly the same issue on another site 18 months ago. Exactly the same problem. We just did this, this, and this. Everything's going to be fine. So that wealth of experience, if you like, and the teamwork is so reassuring for the clients.
What would you say are the most common projects in the industry, and what would you say are the projects that are common for you to do but also that you enjoy?
We do love residential, but we do other stuff as well. We do a bit of church work, a bit of commercial work, but most of our stuff, as you know, is about 80 to 90% private sector residential, and that is everything from one-off houses and large extensions as well, right through typically to little blocks of flats of say 6 to 20 flats, or little housing estates. We hate the word estate, but little clusters of housing from say 6 to 30 houses. They're the things we love. We do love challenging sites with a context that you need to respond to, rather than just say a big rectangular flat greenfield site. It's nice to have a context, and that does stimulate. It's problematic, but it's like unpicking a challenge, really, isn't it? And overcoming a challenge. And that's part of design. That's what design is, really. And I believe that a design is about making 2 + 2 = 5. So it's a creative process that can add value over and above what anybody else might see.
So what's been your most challenging project and what's been your most easiest project?
There's been quite a few challenging ones because of the complexity of the site very often. But in a way, what we enjoy is overcoming challenges. That is our design process. So in a way, the measure of overcoming a problem is the measure of success, really. And that's what makes things most rewarding. So I can't think of any particular project, but there's probably half a dozen or so that have been more challenging than others. In terms of the easy projects, again, if you flip that on its head, we probably wouldn't really like something that you might classify as easy, because another architect could do that, who doesn't bring our ethos to bear.
So what's your favourite type of design to do? What's your style?
Yeah, we love contemporary design. What we like to do is contemporary design, but always in high quality materials. I think a lot of architects, not to offend any architects, but deliberately try to provoke the general public by being in their face or stimulating a response in that way. We're not really into doing that. Just nice contemporary architecture done in a humane way with high quality materials. We do like glazing, so lots of glass features in our project. We don't necessarily go to the default building regs in terms of percentage of glazing and this, that and the other, and the shape, because there's all things about the shape of buildings, not just the size, but whether it's a square or elongated shape in terms of the perimeter compared to the area. We don't go to the default designing like some people might do, like a potato punch exercise. If and where necessary, we get consultants in to justify everything that we're doing. But certainly sustainability, solar gain, and not avoiding excess solar gain in the summer as well. But we just love contemporary architecture, basically.
How do you blend the design of architecture with the functionality that you were just talking about?
Well, the two things go hand in hand, really. Like I say, if you're not setting out to provoke somebody, I think it was Mies van der Rohe said about form follows function. So it's all about discussing things with the client and bringing your own knowledge to bear on a scheme. Then maybe doing like a flow diagram or a bubble map of where rooms relate to each other. Then that eventually is refined into an actual scheme. And then you look at not just the flow in plan-wise, but in terms of the spaces, the three-dimensional flow of a building, how it leads you through into other rooms, how you get light into a hallway, or into any room you want to, the master bedroom or the lounge or whatever, but getting light into a building and light from above, light from different angles, getting light from 2 or 3 directions into a room rather than just one direction. These things are all crucial, and it's also, not to play too heavy on it, but it's good for mental health as well. You know, I mean, architecture does help shape people's lives, and you could feel bad about a building, or you could feel really good about a building.
Do you remember your first project?
Good grief. I do. When I left college, yes. It was over in Sevenoaks. That's when I was just a humble employee when I started out, which is, thanks for that. That's 35 years ago. So, but even before that, I was helping my dad out on his building sites, you know, just painting sheds green and things like that since I've been about 16. But yeah, it was a triangular Victorian building that was, it was a club. That's right, a conservative club. And we converted it into office space. And funnily enough, a few years ago, I mean, you're talking, 35 years ago? And more recently than that, it's now been converted into apartments. Because things, basically, the nature of building follows demand, I guess. So much more demand now for apartments than office space. It's been converted yet again into residential.
How did you first feel when you saw your first couple projects completed and you saw it and you remember that moment when you were sat there designing it and now it's there in front of you and people are using it, living in it, and it's shaping their life? How did that make you feel?
It's very rewarding, obviously. It's good for the ego, should we say. But I mean, it's an honour, really, to be an architect, isn't it? Because, I mean, say a sculptor sculpts something, an architect, you sculpt something in your brain and in your drawings, then somebody else spends millions of pounds actually building it, and the public has to interact with it, whereas a piece of sculpture in an art gallery, public doesn't have to interact with. Planners and other people need to approve it, so it's got to appeal to lots and lots of people. But being able to create something that you know is likely to outlive you, and hopefully by very many decades, is a great honour, really.
I never thought about it that way. It will outlive us.
Yeah. It's like you're trying to be immortal, isn't it, or something?
Yeah.
But it's all the more important to design good buildings, isn't it?
So you're not doing tiny extensions and you're not working with volume house builders. Why is that, and what sorts of clients do you actually enjoy working with?
Yeah, I mean, we used to do, going back, say, 10 or 15 years, we did do some what they call small works, like smaller extensions for people. But there's 2 things to bear in mind. One is a small project can be as complex as a big project or medium-sized project. And secondly is, does that person really need you? So if somebody's doing a tiny extension and the solution, if you like, is quite straightforward, they don't want to bring much, if any, added value over and above what a normal extension would be like, then there's probably no need to use us, in all honesty. We only work on projects where we can bring something to the table in terms of added value. On the other end of the equation, the large schemes, a lot of the big house builders, they only want to build about 200 or 220 houses up. So that often, again, not to be rude to anybody, to any architects or any developers, that offer is what it is, but they do tend to potato punch things. So they will, and that for a purpose. They've refined their house types, they know what they are, the QSs are all over it, they know they've got certainty of how much it's going to cost to deliver and how they deliver it, the process of delivering that house, and there's not really much scope to bring anything to the table for those houses. So very often the architects and planners are doing more of a layout planning, site planning exercise of how those schemes are arranged. So we tend to, in the largest scheme we've done is 85 houses. So, and we've done a few around 25 to 35, but not, I mean, the big boys, should we call them, the big house builders, are called volume house builders for a purpose. And like I say, they want 200 and above minimum.
So if you were to design your own estate or village, what would that look like?
It would look different to the volume house builders' housing estates, shall we say. We do like variety. We like English townscape, because a lot of people, even a lot of planners, miss the trick on English townscape is very, very different to townscape elsewhere in the world. So say, for example, in France, very often the buildings will look alike. They'll often be a beige sort of colour, whereas English townscape, you think of any good quality English town, apart from the exceptions, so let's get the exceptions out there first, exceptions being places like Bath and Edinburgh, where there is a prevailing material and a prevailing style. Most English townscape is about contrast. So very often the buildings are different to the one next door. They might be the opposite. So you might have a tile hung building, a white weatherboarded building, a black and white building, a brick building. So it's that variety. And you can often get what they call unity within variety. So you've got a mix. So these things are all mixed up in what looks like a random way. But obviously if you were designing it, you do a pretend random way, which would need a lot of thought. It's harder to do that. And ditto the spaces. So if you think, say, in France, the Champs-Élysées, you're looking like kilometres away. Whereas in England, very often it's about closing down vistas and creating little squares, little incidental things that happen as you walk through that townscape.
So you have quite a few projects in the pipeline. You have a flats in Crystal Palace, micro flats at Appeal, houses in Sutton Valence. So how do you maintain quality across so many moving parts?
We know what we know. We're very good at what we do. Those schemes do sound very different because obviously we do one-off houses, we do flats, we do the micro flats. You can't be a specialist in everything, but there are some things that we are very, very good at. We're very good at the PRS co-living micro flats schemes. We've done many of those. So they're great fun. We know exactly what the market needs, how to do them well, which is important, because these things all add value to the product for the client. In terms of the houses, obviously it's a different aspect, but again, we've done so many houses, we know exactly what people want. If it's an end user client, which is the other advantage of our work, very often it's for an end user client, so you can have that conversation. Whereas a big house builder, they're trying to second guess what their end user might want. So you get a much closer relationship and a much more productive, we might say, design process as well, when you know your end user client, which is great. But then you've got things like another thing we specialise in, we've been at a very, very good track record and is doing houses in gardens. So we've done, I think it's nearly 30 of those projects now successfully, where somebody's got a large garden, you build a new detached house in that garden, in addition to keeping the previous house, the original house. And again, we sort of specialise in that. We've got a great track record in that as well.
So you said at the Pillars of Property event that the industry's been too amateurish for too long. What do you think needs to change first?
That all comes from the Building Safety Act, which obviously is arisen from Grenfell. But the Building Safety Act is not just about fire. It's come from a pursuit of excellence in the construction industry. And part of that is a recognition by government that the industry as a whole has been too amateurish. So say, imagine building, it is different, granted, but say building a BMW car in factory conditions compared to most building sites in England. It's like chalk and cheese. So a building site will always be a building site. Sometimes people will be up to their knees in mud, but it's no excuse for not having that mindset of excellence, should we say. So really that's where that all comes from.
Okay. So the Building Safety Act came out of tragedy, but it's forcing a higher standard across the board. What's your take on how it's actually changing behaviour?
Yeah, it's going to take a while. And also we've been to CPDs and things and we're enacting things already. But even people who are very much passionate about it, as we are, a lot of those people, even where it's come from, people delivering those modules, they say it could take 2 to 5 years to really bed in. And it may even take a few people going to jail and things like, things really hitting the fan, if you excuse the expression, for things to get really serious and people take everything seriously. So a lot of it is about the golden thread of decision making, and part of the amateurish nature of building sites recognised under the Building Safety Act is people making last minute substitutions. So people might say that there'll be a design, you may even get building regulations, full plans approval, then people change things on site. So they might change a detail, they might change even how something's designed slightly, or change a product or a material. And it's part of it is to avoid those last minute decisions, because very often they're expedient decisions about let's just use this, mate, it's on site already. Or it might be a cost driven decision to use a product. Say there was a product that was like £36, they want to use one that's £24. But very often that decision making process has not been fully thought through. So we've come across people in the past, they might say, yes, it's just as good as this. But you have to assess it against every single aspect of the building regulations. So just because something is as good in some ways doesn't mean it's as good in other ways. So you have to think about structure, fire, acoustics, everything has to be considered. And very often if you challenge somebody, they'll often say, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So it's all about, and the golden thread of decision making, in a way, it's trying to avoid and drive out last minute decisions like that. And what it does, it's trying to make it so hard to change a decision that people don't change the decision in the first place. So say, for example, let's thinking out loud, let's say something, you could change something and it'd save £500, say for the client. But if the rigmarole and the process of making that change and logging that change through the golden thread, if that change costs £1,000, just the process of changing something, and you're only saving £500, then obviously you've lost 500. So it's about driving away expedient decision making.
So what causes people to change material, and if they needed to change material, how would they go about that in the correct way?
You'd have to, depends on the level and size and risk of the building, the different processes for different things. So sometimes it can be easier, but it needs to be logged. There needs to be a paper trail. The golden thread really is a paper trail of decision making. If it's a bigger building and a bigger change, then it has to go through a whole process that could take weeks. Getting building regulations approval of the actual building control people, that you actually substitute, you're flagging it as an issue. I want to make this change. Then you have to go through the whole, paper trail of doing it, getting it signed off by relevant authorities. So it is, especially on larger schemes, it is quite hard. And in terms of what you're saying about where that change come from, it might be something as simple as what's available at the builders merchants that day. I got to the builders merchants, I didn't have any, so we got 1,000 of these instead. Well, is that 1,000 of these instead as good as what you originally needed?
Do you think the industry is really ready for the golden thread and doing things properly, or are people still trying to do things cheaply?
There will be a lag, like I mentioned, even people promoting all these things, so there could be a 2 to 5 year lag for it to really embed in this, because it's a mental attitude really. It's about the pursuit of excellence and doing things right, and doing things right the first time around. So there will be some people who are resistant to that. There's people who are actually leaving the industry because they can't be bothered with it. People, say somebody who said, oh, we've always done it this way, mate. Well, you can't do it that way anymore, It's a different mental approach to these things. So it will take a while. Hopefully it will get to the point, so there's a divergence really, people who are pursuing excellence and people who might be dragging their feet a little bit regarding this kind of legislation. But you'd hope that eventually you do things right because it's impossible to do them wrong. And you'd hope that people who are really, really bad offenders would, I say not to smite anybody, but really bad offenders really should be driven out of the industry. If they can't pull their socks up, they've got to work at the right level of mental attitude to these things.
So when you first joined the industry, of course, the way that things are now are so different to how they first were when you joined. How have you found going through that evolution of architecture and the regulations that come along with it? Because a lot of architects would say that the joy's been sucked out of it with so many regulations, putting aside their health and safety. That's important. But
Yeah. I wouldn't agree, really. If you're doing things properly, then you can work with regulations. In some ways, of course, remember Grenfell? What Grenfell was wrapping an existing block of flats in flammable insulation. So really, we don't always, it's not an upward curve all the time, There are blips in how we improve and make mistakes. So people are still making mistakes, even over the last 15, 20 years. So you could argue that building was built, I think, early 70s, concrete, strong, never would have killed people. It wouldn't have caught fire, but it was cold. So it was cold inside, really bad for thermals, pretty bad. also for things like fungus, condensation, that kind of thing. So in trying to overcome that, it actually created its own problem. So things, and that's a really good case study for making sure things are always thought about in the round. Like I was saying before, about every aspect of the building regs, like people who try to substitute materials or try to substitute products, that applies to the entire building. The building has to be thought in the round. So by trying to overcome an insulation problem, it's actually created a new problem.
Do you think the initial problem with the Grenfell Tower, they should have, I know this is a touchy subject, they should have maybe, was there another way they could have fixed the problem, or do you think they should have demolished the building?
They could have fixed the problem with non-flammable insulation. There was a lack of decision-making and scrutiny being stripped out. So you've got one body who effectively was the client, the commissioning agent and the building control and lots of other aspects as well. So there wasn't independent people keeping an eye on each other and bringing sufficient scrutiny to bear, because that was a cost-driven decision, really. Even the kind of insulation they used, you can get a non-flammable version of that. Or they could have done something with, not to get too technical, but maybe mineral wool insulation, which doesn't catch fire and actually is used as a fire prevention, a fire blanket very often in buildings. So let's say the thing is, decisions can't always be cost driven, put it that way, which goes without saying really, doesn't it? It's all about quality.
Okay, so you've mentioned striving for perfection, 4mm tolerances, modular quality control, proper documentation. Where does that discipline come from? You're very disciplined, so where does that come from?
Am I? I'm not really. I'm a creative. I'm not a control freak or anything. I'm more on the creative spectrum than anything, I would say. But it's about, you can be creative and do things properly rather than things improperly. And the 4mm thing comes from speaking to people in the modular building industry, which I think will get more and more popular. We've found very often it's been too expensive in the past. That's fully modular, where you literally get a building built off-site, and it could be in Poland or Slovakia or even in China. Then you bring it over to England and erect it. And then literally everything is there. You literally just slit it open with a Stanley knife, open the cellophane, and everything is finished, which is fantastic. And I think with wet trades, there's also bricks and mortar is wet trades, and a lot of the bricklayers going back to Eastern Europe, whereas they came here to work in the past. I think there'll be more of a space for modular. And what they do, it's all about their commitment to excellence. There's 3 providers in that sphere that we know quite well, and they work to 4mm, like say max tolerances. And it's all about doing things perfectly, and again, doing it right the first time. Not just doing it right, but doing it right first time. So you're minimising waste as well. So you're not making a mistake, then saying that's not good enough. You're ensuring it's perfect the first time around.
When you look at a project that's been rushed or done badly, what's the first thing that you spot?
I just think it's a shame. Because, I mean, say you look at a building, let's be honest, you could spend £4 million well, or you could spend £4 million badly. You could cut corners that then cost £1 million to rectify. So what's the point of doing that? I say doing things properly, and it goes back to things like efficiency, in product manufacture, etc. If you do things more efficiently, minimising waste, minimising time, it's just a no-brainer to me to do things properly the first time around.
So where do you see people rushing the most, where the problems would arise?
I think it's lack of attention to detail and lack of mental attitude. What I like is if you work with good tradesmen, say you're looking at a building, and this is really quite trite, but it's a good yardstick to work by, is a brickie would like to get all the perpends lined up, as they call it, so everything looks perfect. If you've got a tradesman who's got all the perpends lined up, and they know that's going to be covered up in any case, so nobody would even know, then that shows their mental discipline and what a good tradesman they are. And the converse of that is that you can get brickwork and block work that I describe as like porridge. You've got bits of bricks this way and that way, you've got cut bricks making up the differences. But you can tell if somebody's a good tradesman or not almost straight away. And it's a joy. There's so many things on television, like on Channel 4, etc., about cowboy builders. And if you're a layperson, you'd probably quite rightly be paranoid about these things. But it is a joy to work with good builders and good tradesmen.
How have you found good builders and good tradesmen?
The ones we work with are very, very good. Yeah, I mean, but perhaps we're lucky because the kind of projects we work on are good projects for good clients. Again, that's not cost driven. If you're doing a tender exercise, then you and your client want to have the peace of mind that everybody on that tender list, say there's 4 or 5 builders, you want to know they're all good. You don't want anybody in there who's a cowboy builder, might come in at 3/4 as much and then let you down. So you need to pre-vet the contractors, either from experience of working with them in the past, or going to see their previous projects, or speaking to their previous clients, if they're happy to share that information. Like I say, you need to make sure everybody on that list is good.
Some people still see quality as a luxury. Do you think it will become the bare minimum in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I would hope so, for sure, yeah. And it's important to define what we mean by quality, because, say, gold taps. People might say, oh, it's got gold taps. I think gold taps are crass. I don't want gold taps in my schemes, you know. So how do you define quality? I mean, quality, and there's always, when we talk about specification, there's always an appropriate level of spec as well. So you're not necessarily looking to over-specify things, but there's always an appropriate level. So, and build costs, I mean, going back to what we're saying about the rectification of buildings that are done badly, build costs are really, really high right now. So it's impossible to do things, well, you want it to be impossible to do things in a shoddy way with bad materials, but at the same time, we are practical. We don't have a head in the clouds or anything. We do work with clients, and by discussing things with clients and knowing what they want and where it is sometimes, that lets you know the appropriate level of spec for certain things, but no gold taps. And like I say, it's all about redefining what quality means in your own mind. I mean, quality could be taken to imply competency. I think that's probably what I'm trying to say. So think in terms of competency and the right product, the right design for that requirement.
So if someone came to have you do one of their projects, what would your quality look like towards that project?
Well, they certainly get our dedication to the project, so they have our full care and attention. Otherwise, we wouldn't even take on the project. We do turn down and miss out on lots of work, as you know from working with me. Probably half of the projects we're just either not interested, or they might be cost driven, so they get a cheaper architect or a set of technicians or draftsmen to draft a scheme for them. So the bare minimum is we always work with people who are interested in architecture, and they recognise the added value that we bring to a project. And that could be somebody doing a house for themselves, and that added value could be pounds and pence, or it could be quality of life. We would hope it's both. So the better quality of life for 15 years, and as and when they come to sell, they get more money as well in terms of return on build cost, return on investment. So that's really what we bring to the table. And I think I mentioned we only work on things where we believe we can bring something to the table. So if we can't add value, then probably there's no need to use us.
So you've worked with all types of consultants and contractors. What separates a good team from a bad team?
It's essential these days. Teamwork is everything, and collaborative working is everything. The main thing for a client is to get all the disciplines covered. So nobody's trying and second guess what might be the right thing to do. So we work with, there's probably like 20 different types of consultants we work with, right from fire engineers to energy modelers, also structural engineers, landscape people, ecology people, a whole host. And really the people we've worked with have always been good. I would say that there probably are some cheaper people out there, but you do need a good team. I'm not saying people should overpay for things. Of course, you might be able to get a consultancy study, say £3,000. Somebody else might charge £7,000. So you want to know they're good, and everybody working together as a team, really. That is what teamwork's all about. Everybody's pulling in the right direction in the client's interests, and making sure that they're fully over their brief for whatever discipline they're working in.
So how do you spot when you know that someone knows what they're doing versus someone who's just bluffing their way through?
Yeah, I think the answer's in your question, really, that you can tell if somebody's bluffing quite quick. I like to use the analogy of hairdressers and barbers, So if somebody's doing your hair, you can tell in the first 10 or 15 seconds if they're good or not. So if they're sort of faffing around doing this and this and this, you probably think they're stalling for time, or they're not quite sure. Whereas somebody who knows exactly what they're doing, you just got that reassurance and that confidence in them almost from the off, which is fantastic.
Zero carbon, good design, biodiversity net gain, proper reporting. This is a direction of travel. Do you think that the industry is adapting fast enough?
It's certainly adapting. I think there could be a bit of a divergence, again, not to criticise any developers at all, but somebody who's doing for the mass market, they don't really care so much about their end users. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but they want to get their products shifted. They want to do what they need to do to get through the regulations. Whereas a lot of the people we work for, they care very much about things. And the reason for that is some of these things do cost, then you measure their payback in years. So you might say that's got a 6-year payback, that's got an 8-year payback, that's got a 12-year payback. And if you're working for a private client, then they're very much focused on that payback, and they care about it, and they're happy to do it. And ditto on the PRS co-living schemes. They charge one set fee for people per month, and that includes things like heating and lighting and their council tax, etc. So the operator of that building, they also care very much rather about bills. Because it comes back to fuel poverty as well. Fuel poverty is a real big thing. People paying too much of their take-home pay on their fuel bills. So it affects individuals, and also it affects people who operate PRS schemes as well. So very often what you find, one of the problems we've got these days, is the multi-millionaires who often do the green things and lower their utility bills, whereas poor people often can't. So a lot of the modular people we work with who are very, very much committed to zero carbon, they actually like to work with the RSL sector, the housing associations, because they know they really are making a big difference to people's lives.
There's a sense of divergence. Some firms are flying and others are fading. What's the difference in your view?
I think it comes to quality and networking, staying ahead of the game, being aware of trends, and you only find that by keeping your ears to the ground. The old thing I was saying about 2 of these and 1 of this as well, but also working with like-minded peers. So for example, at Pillars of Property, that is exclusive of people who are very much committed to quality. So if you're mixing and talking with people who are committed to that level of excellence all the time, then it's like everybody pulls everybody else up, which is fantastic. And that calibre of thoughts and almost like intellectual rigour, if you like, is really important. Where somebody who associates with people who don't care about that thing at all, they're bound to sink to the bottom, aren't they? So I think being aware, but certainly being aware of trends and speaking to like-minded people who care about quality is important. And the people who do that will be rewarded, and the people who don't care about quality could be the ones who drop off the end of the conveyor belt, the ones who are driven away by the Building Safety Act.
This isn't in my question, but I have a question. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to build work, and of course now where we have the regulations changing, especially towards the insulation, mm-hmm. How is the price of materials affecting flipping properties? It's
very, very hard. What we find is our most bullish clients are often people who are building to hold, like private renter sector, whether the PRS micro-flat co-living schemes or building blocks of flats to enhance their portfolio and holding those. It's very, very hard. And build costs have shot up so much. I mean, it's not that long ago. I remember it was £100 a square foot build cost. And it's probably a long time ago, but on my radar, it's probably literally like 8 or 9 years ago. And now you're looking at something like £250 a square foot. Because what happens, everything's gone up in price and the building regs have been tightened, as you're saying. So say a piece of insulation that would have cost £25 a few years ago would now be £85 because it's much more expensive and you need more of it. So, build costs are horrendous. And very often, even here in the southeast, we're in the southeast now, it's all about GDV and return on build cost. So if something's costing you £3,000 a square, let's go to square metres now, costing you £3,000 a square metre to build, and it's only worth £3,000 a square metre, then what is the point? And taking that back to its logical conclusion, it does mean that anybody who overpays for land or a building, if you pay too much in the first place, then you're pretty much screwed from day one. You have to be so careful these days.
So would you say it makes more sense to keep the property once it's been renovated or built, or to sell it? Because I know that, of course, now there's landlord charges. So if you wanted to keep it, it would be quite difficult to keep it as a rental.
Yeah, it is hard. And with the EPCs being tightened up all the time as well for landlords, it's really, really hard. A lot of our clients are the people who hold, and we've got an analogy as well in the aged living sector, because we're working on an old people's home. One of our clients has got 4 such homes in Bromley, large facilities, large assets, is keeping the existing and then adding more to it. So that's a good way, going back to my thing about the land cost. If you've got free land, so say you've got an asset and it's got land which is not really that usable as space, for gardens. We've got areas which people might have broken glass on it, for example, and a couple of dog poos, if we're allowed to say that,
We can say that.
or even parking. We've got a lot of our schemes in urban centres, both city centres and in town centres, are zero parking. So if you've got a block of flats and there's an area with, say, 9 car parking spaces on it, which are not used or little used, the planners very often will allow you to have zero parking, or maybe just retain 1 disabled person's visitor parking space and build on the rest of it. So it's all about wringing as much value as you can from every square inch of that site.
What if you could buy land near a town centre, whether it has a building on it or not? What's the probability of turning that land into parking if you know that there's a need for parking in the area? Would that work?
That would work, yes, if there's need, yeah. That's I think when things get in shortage, that's when there's supply is demand. And also things like electric car charging points. That's quite a lucrative market right now. If you get pockets of land where you can put some electric car charging points in, developers are looking at that as well. And that could be a permanent use, or it could be a temporary use, where you're thinking of maybe, land banking, if you like, that you might do a block of flats on there in 12 years or 15 years.
At the Pillars of Property event, you mentioned renewal, and spring being a time of fresh starts. Of course, that's what the theme was. What feels new in the industry right now that you're actually optimistic about?
We're very optimistic, not to be political, but we're quite pleased with the way the government is leaning on planning, being more pro-development. We're very keen and optimistic about things like power generation and public transport. Again, going back to the government, we think the whole drive. I was reading somewhere that basically Keir Starmer wants to rebuild Britain. And it means that in the wider sense of public services and society, but also I think it does mean it in terms of bricks and mortar. Not that we use many bricks and mortar, but in terms of literally rebuilding Britain. So our broken infrastructure, our broken cities, the lack of housing supply. Of course, their intention, whether they get there or not, of building 1.5 million dwellings in their first term, in their first 5 years. Even if they just achieve, fall slightly short and build 1.4 million or 1.3 million, is still something, and the intent is certainly there. And even things like the Universal theme park being announced last week, the doubling of Luton Airport being announced the week before that, which is probably connected to Universal, of course, because it's only a few miles away. So we're optimistic about that. At the same time, we're optimistic about things like the environment, things like BNG, zero carbon. We're passionate. I know it's political hot potato right now, but we're very much in favour of zero carbon. It's quite hard at the moment to get zero carbon in construction and zero carbon in use, but certainly in terms of zero carbon in use, so once a building's built, it's actually using, in fact, net gaining carbon, if you like. So it's generating more than the occupants need and the building needs. We think that's a great way forward. So you can have, it's not like you can have your cake and eat it too, if you like. So you can have development, but development done in the right way, like I say, alongside energy considerations and ecology considerations.
Slight segue. I want to know your opinion. Bricks and mortar or timber frame?
It is difficult. I think it's getting harder to build in bricks and mortar. I can see a day eventually where bricks and mortar is mostly reserved for doing brick extensions to existing brick buildings, and new builds are much more in terms of timber frame. And there's lots of aspects of timber frame, of course. There's traditional timber frame, which is very cheap. It's the cheapest way of doing things that we've found. And we've done all these. You've also got the SIPs. You've got structural insulated panels, which is a fantastic way of working as well. Then, right at the other extreme, you've got the fully modular that we mentioned and touched on earlier in this podcast. But I think the emphasis will change. So I think bricks and mortar will get less common. and timber frame will get more common. And that's partly due to economics as well. Because if you do a bricks and mortar building now, insulated to modern standards, it can be like 400 mil thick, It's just crazy. You've got lots of cold things either side and insulation in the middle. Whereas with a timber frame package or a cassette, that can be compacted right down. So you can be super insulated, but with less thickness of wall, a more efficient use of materials, and completely avoiding the use of materials that are difficult.
What's the longevity difference?
I guess you could argue there's not many timber frame buildings around from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, so bricks and mortar may last, but then you do worry about the quality of some of the recent bricks and mortar buildings anyway. Are they going to be around in 3,000 years like a pyramid? I doubt it very much.
Because I think that's what some people may struggle to come to terms with house prices going up. And when someone's purchasing a home and they're paying a high price for their home and it turns out to be a timber frame and not bricks and mortar, what are you paying for?
Yeah, I think people should be aware if their property is a timber frame. Perhaps that should be articulated better to people. And I think there's an English mentality, because even if you think about something like Coronation Street, you're not talking about Mayfair, but it's a product and it's still there. It's still doing well after 125 years. So Coronation was, 1901, I should say. So the longevity is there. Compare that to, say, things that were done, say the prefabs after the Second World War. A lot of things do perish if you're not careful. They get condensation inside them. And also, looking at the American market, so a lot of Americans are quite happy if their house just goes through one or two mortgage cycles, even just one mortgage cycle. It's because they're happy, or happier, should we say, to demolish and rebuild after 30 years. Whereas I think the English psyche is more inclined towards permanency, isn't it? And the idea that, perhaps even being silly, the Englishman's home is a castle sort of thing, that you want to know your house is going to be there forever. But we do both. And the thing, it's important to remember that modern buildings, if done well, which we always do well, are not like a perishable sort of prefab as they were in the past, You do need to do things very, very properly, and it could last forever.
So the housing estates that are being developed now, how long do you think they would last for?
Well, traditionally in England, you're supposed to design a building that is going to last at least 50 years, 50 to 60 years, and that's always been understood. That's been the yardstick for British construction. You'd hope it's going to last much, much longer than that. Going back to what we were saying, I think people should be educated and should be told. So a lot of people will buy a house and they won't know. They'll look at it and think it's a brick building, but really it's a timber frame building. It might be a timber frame building with a skin of brickwork outside, or it might even be a timber frame building just with brick slips on the outside, So it is, people should have got a duty, should we say, to tell people that.
If you were advising a younger version of yourself starting out in today's market, what would you tell them?
That's a jolly good question. Not sure what the answer is. I would probably say, be aware of changes.
Yeah.
Make sure you work at the top end of the market. Make sure you enjoy your life. So a lot of people don't enjoy their jobs. Architecture is a vocation. So most architects do enjoy what they do for a living. But at the same time, don't be a pushover. Be a hard-nosed businessman. Make sure a lot of architects enjoy their work so much they don't charge sufficient fees, for example. Make sure you charge a good fee to look after yourself and your staff and your families. But yeah, enjoy yourself basically, but stay at the cutting edge of knowledge. Being aware of trends is so important. Otherwise, you could easily be left behind.
How do you manage to stay ahead of trends?
Surrounding myself by younger people. That's including yourself, yeah. But no, it's true. That's part of it, We had a conversation once about very old architects. We've inherited work and clients from people who are using architects who literally up until a few days or weeks ago were using drawing boards still. So they didn't even move to AutoCAD. We've moved beyond AutoCAD. We're now in Revit BIM for almost all of our work. So you have to keep up with trends, and you can't be a dinosaur. I don't know if that's being rude to some people, but you can't, obviously. And I do think keeping yourself fresh, surrounding yourself by younger people who probably have their finger on the pulse of these things as well, And that's like a symbiotic relationship, because younger people gain from the experience of older people. At the same time, older people gain from the energy, if you like, and the awareness of younger people.
Kingsley, the most overrated buzzword in property right now. What is it?
Don't know. You tell me. Sustainability, maybe.
Sustainability.
Oh, is that what you were thinking of? Yeah, sustainability.
I know the most overrated phrase in our industry. No, overstated phrase in our industry. You ready? Can you do it cheaper?
Oh gosh. Yeah, you don't want that, do you?
Okay, so I quite like this one for you. One principle that's a non-negotiable for you.
I guess having enough time to devote to a project. So if somebody says, can you do that for half the fee or even 2/3 of the fee, we just say no. So we always insist on charging a good enough fee to allow ourselves to do a good job for that client. So we'd rather turn work away than try and do it cheaply.
I'm not going to ask you if it's ever happened, because I know that it has without even having to ask you. How many times has a client come back to you needing your help after they wanted a better price, but you stood firm on what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it does happen. You'd hope they don't go off kilter and get a very bad architect who may have a very bad builder, or even a non-architect. But people come back a few years later or a few months later and say, we realised we needed a better job doing. We've got, in one thing, I'm not saying we enjoy it particularly, but we're actually helping save projects as well at the moment. There's a large block of flats that have gone well off track due to lack of expertise, should we say, the previous architects. And we've been brought in, the developer, in fact, it was the funder, forced that developer to sack their architect, and they found us as being a good architect experience in blocks of flats. And we've come in to salvage that project, which is going really well. So, like I say, I'm not sure I'd fancy doing that 24/7, doing that service. But so there is bad work still being done out there, but you need to make sure, I say, you've got the calibre of people and knowledge and enough time. Time is important to be able to do a good job for that client always.
One habit that helps you stay sharp.
Just awareness, really, keeping up with the trends. So to go back to that as a subject, but you need to be aware of what's going on. There's lots of resources online these days. We've got our own resource on our server that we use. As you know, we're all cloud-based these days, so rather than a physical server on the cloud, is just keeping aware of things that we see. Like if we're walking around London, for example, both me and our colleagues take photographs of those buildings, just something you admire. So we're not precious in terms of being defensive. We're very willing to learn from other architects as well. And that's quite a mature attitude to take as well. So rather than thinking you're the prima donna and everybody else is rubbish, look at what other good architects are doing and try to emulate their work. It'll never be the same because your site's bound to be different to their site, but there's always things you can learn from other people's work.
The next question, I know the answer to, and I think everyone's going to know the answer to, but humour me. Better to act with 70% certainty now or wait for 95% later?
I think act, because, what's the expression? Paralysis, If you're inactive, nothing happens. And what we do is a creative process anyway. So even on designs, we're quite upfront with each other. Our colleagues will say, I'll say to somebody in the office, can you just try this and test it? So I actually use the word test. I don't mean test as in, a scientist testing something. Just try an idea and see if it lands or not. It might not be any better than the existing idea, or it might unlock another trail of thought and an idea that leads to something better. So it's all about, let's say, being open to ideas. And again, that's all part of the creative process, really.
What's one thing that you would want people to know about you? What the takeaway from this video?
I guess that we're good, we're creative, that we don't like to do sort of potato punch, as I call them, repeat schemes. We want every site to be a challenge. So if you have a complex site, we can see things. It's probably a sign of insanity, but I can look at a site and see things that other people can't see. So I can imagine something being on that site that works for that site. And then it's all about how you articulate and get to that process with the design and the planners. So I think it's just the awareness and the commitment to quality, really. And, like I say, the creative side. Because you can have competency without creativity. You need creativity and competency.
This will be one of many conversations within Pillars of Property, and I hope that you can join us next time when we speak to Mark from DiGiorgio Properties.